Neanderthals, what's the first image that pops into your head? Uh, Probably something like a brute, right? A dim-witted cave dweller.
Yeah, that's the classic stereotype. Knuckle dragging, maybe grunting a bit.
Exactly. But what if everything you thought you knew about Neanderthals was, well, maybe a little outdated? Today, we're doing a deep dive into some fascinating sources that really flip that script.
They really do. Well, for ages, our picture of Neanderthals was based on pretty limited finds and, let's be honest, a lot of assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll see how recent discoveries, especially archaeological ones, are just dismantling those old ideas. They're painting a picture of uh, incredibly sophisticated beings.
Sophisticated how? More than just surviving.
Oh, way more. We're talking complex planning, symbolic thought, real ingenuity. It's quite a shift.
So our mission today is really to pull out the key insights from the source material. We want to show you how advanced Neanderthals actually were, basically giving you a shortcut to being, genuinely well-informed about our ancient relatives.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's dig into the evidence that really reshapes things, starting with their incredible survival skills and maybe even some engineering.
Definitely. Imagine this. Stone Age humans running what scientists are basically calling a fat factory.
A fat factory. Okay, tell me more. Where was this?
This was at a site called Neumark Nord in Germany. We're talking about 125,000 years ago.
Wow.
Archaeologists dug up something like 120,000 bone fragments there and 16,000 flint tools. Plus, clear evidence they were using fire.
Okay, so lots of bones, lots of tools, but how do we get to factory?
It's the scale and the process. It
Yeah.
suggests this wasn't just random butchering. It was systematic, a deliberate operation.
Meaning they weren't just eating right away. What does that level of, organization tell us about how they thought? How does that knock down the old stereotype?
It tells us a lot. It shows planning. They systematically smash bones, specifically marrow-rich ones, with stone hammers.
Okay.
Then it looks like they boil these fragments for hours. The fat melts, floats to the top.
And they could skim it off once it cooled down.
Exactly. Now think about the steps involved. You need to plan hunts, maybe big ones. You need to transport these heavy carcasses back. And crucially, you might store some parts for later processing. That's thinking beyond just the next meal.
Right, not just immediate gratification.
And setting up a specific area just for rendering fat. That shows real organization. Like Will Robrooks, one of the study authors, said, this attitude that Neanderthals were dumb, this is another data point that proves otherwise.
It also suggests they really understood nutrition, doesn't it? Why was getting fat so vital?
That's critical, especially for hunter-gatherers relying heavily on meat. If you eat only lean meat, you can run into something called protein poisoning.
Rabbit starvation, I think I've heard it called.
That's the one. Or mal de caribou. It's debilitating, can even be lethal. Neanderthals were quite muscular, probably needed a lot of calories. Lean meat just wouldn't cut it.
So they had to get calories from fat or carbs.
Absolutely needed it. Muscle meat itself is surprisingly lean. So bones, packed with marrow and fatty tissue, were a gold mine.
And the bones at this German site reflect that.
Overwhelmingly. They found remains from 172 large animals, horses, deer, aurochs. And there's a clear preference for the longest bones, the ones packed with the most marrow. They knew what they were doing.
Okay, but how did they boil things without, pots and pans like we have?
Good question. They likely got creative, using things like birch bark, maybe folded carefully, or animal skins, even stomach linings. Fill it with water, hang it carefully over a fire.
Resourceful.
Very. And get this, they also found charred bits of hazelnuts, acorns, and sloe plums.
No way. So they might have been adding plants to this greasy broth.
It looks like it. Maybe for flavor, maybe for extra nutrients. It adds another layer. As Jeff Smith, another researcher on that study, put it, these weren't simple hunter-gatherers just getting by day to day. They were master planners who could look ahead, organize complex tasks, and squeeze every last calorie from their environment.
Master planners. That's a far cry from the old image. Okay, so from strategic food tech, let's switch gears slightly. Their ingenuity went even further. Ancient superglue. Seriously.
It sounds wild, but yeah. They found traces of this adhesive, this glue, made from two components, ochre.
That's like a natural pigment, right? Earthy color.
Exactly. Ochre and beetleman, which is a natural tar-like substance. These traces were found on stone tools from a site in France called Le Moustier.
And how old are these?
They date from 40,000 up to maybe 120,000 years ago. And here's a cool detail. The artifacts were actually dug up ages ago, but sat unexamined in a Berlin museum since the 1960s until someone recently took a closer look.
Wow. Okay, so making glue. What's the big cognitive deal here? Isn't bitumen already sticky?
It is, but that's the fascinating part. It's too sticky on its own. The genius here is mixing it with ochre. Counterintuitively, adding ochre actually makes the bitumen less sticky
Wait, less sticky? Why would they want that?
because it transforms it. When researchers tried recreating it, they found adding a lot of ochre turned the super sticky bitumen into this viscous mass, something you could actually handle and mold.
Ah, so not just for sticking a point onto a spear shaft, but maybe for making a proper handle.
Precisely. They could mold comfortable, sturdy grips for their tools. It shows they were engineering materials for specific needs. Real early engineers, as the researchers call them.
That's incredible. And getting these ingredients wasn't easy, I bet.
Probably not. We already knew Neanderthals could make birch tar glue, which itself is a complex multi-step process involving distillation.
Right.
But for this ochre-bitumen mix, the sources suggest they might have had to get the ochre and the bitumen from different regions lying far away from each other.
So a real investment of time and effort. These tools must have been highly valued.
Definitely implies that, yes.
Okay, advanced food processing, engineered glue. What else have you got? You mentioned something about string. How can a tiny piece of string tell us anything big?
Oh, this one is genuinely groundbreaking. At a site called Abri de Maras in southern France, they found this tiny fragment, just 6 millimeters long.
Tiny.
Microscopic almost, zero point 0.5 millimeters wide. It was wrapped around a stone tool, and when they looked closely, it was made of 3 bundles of fibers twisted together.
Twisted fibers, like a cord.
Exactly, made from conifer bark fibers. And it dates back 41,000 to 52,000 years ago. That makes it the earliest known evidence of, well, textile or cord making, and it absolutely couldn't have formed naturally like that.
Okay, I can see it's early, but what cognitive skills does making a tiny cord actually imply? It seems so basic now.
But think about what goes into it. First, you need detailed knowledge about plants. Which trees, what part of the tree,
Right.
and when. The researchers point out the best time to get these inner bark fibers is spring or early summer. So knowledge of seasonality.
Okay, practical plant knowledge. What else?
Then there's the process itself. Twisting fibers together requires dexterity, sure, but also understanding concepts like pairs, sets. You need some basic numeracy. To create bundles, then twist them into a 3-ply cord, maybe combine cords to make a rope.
I never thought about the math involved in making string.
It's implicit. This tiny fragment, as the study says, really opens a new window on the cognition of Neanderthals and their ability to organize their way of life.
And if they could make string, that hints at much more, doesn't it?
Exactly. It suggests a whole much larger fiber technology. Think about it. If you can make cordage, you can potentially make bags, mats, nets for fishing or hunting, maybe even woven fabric, baskets, snares.
Even simple boats or rafts?
Potentially. It points towards a much more complex and organized toolkit for living than we usually imagine. Far from that simple brute.
Okay, so we've covered planning, engineering, technology, but there's another side to this, right? The sources suggest they weren't just practical, but maybe artistic, symbolic.
Yes, and this is where it gets really fascinating, pushing back against that stereotype even harder. Let's go back to France. A cave called the Roche Catar.
What did they find there?
Markings on the cave walls. Lines, swirls, dots. But not accidental scratches. These were made by people deliberately dragging their fingers across the soft rock surface, the tuff.
Okay, finger markings. How do they know it was Neanderthals, and how old are they?
Dating methods like OSL, optically stimulated luminescence, which tells you when sediment was last exposed to light, along with the types of tools found there, classic Mousterian tools linked to Neanderthals, firmly place these markings with them. And they're old, at least 57,000 years old.
So older than a lot of the famous cave art we associate with early Homo sapiens, but were they just random doodles?
That's what the researchers looked at closely. And their conclusion was no. These were intentional shapes and patterns, a deliberate composition.
Meaning thought went into it.
Exactly. A thought process giving rise to conscious design and intent. He wasn't just utilitarian. This points towards abstract thought, maybe even the beginnings of art. It really challenges that dim-witted label.
Conscious design. Okay, that's pretty compelling. But wait, there's more, isn't there? Jewelry. Neanderthals made jewelry.
Get this, yes.
Ugh.
From a site in present-day Croatia, they found eagle talons. Now, these were actually dug up over a century ago.
Like the glue tools? Sitting in storage?
Sort of, yeah. Only recently, researchers took a really close look and identified specific marks on them. Cut marks, notches, polished areas, even places where it looks like they were rubbed together, maybe by string.
So clear signs they were worked by humans.
Absolutely. Proving they were manipulated into a piece of jewelry. And these are dated to more than 130,000 years ago.
130,000 years ago. That's incredibly early for symbolic items like jewelry. And eagle talons. I mean, catching an eagle even today is ridiculously hard.
Exactly. Think about the skill involved. It suggests really advanced level of prowess, sophisticated planning, maybe even ritual significance. Why eagles?
Yeah.
Powerful predators.
It definitely doesn't fit the brute narrative at all.
Not even close.
Okay, so cave markings, jewelry. Is there anything else pointing to this symbolic or artistic side?
There is a really interesting little object from Einhornhole Cave in Germany. Unicorn cave, literally.
Unicorn cave. Okay, what did they find?
A small piece of bone, a toe bone, actually a phalanx from a giant deer.
Giant deer, like megaloceros, those huge ones.
That's the one, extinct now. And this tiny bone, it's engraved.
Engraved with what?
A very clear geometric pattern. The researchers describe it as stacked offset chevrons. Basically, sets of parallel lines forming a kind of V-shaped pattern, repeated.
Huh. How old is this one?
At least 51,000 years old. And it doesn't seem to have any practical function. It looks purely decorative, maybe a personal ornament.
And making something like that, was it easy?
The researchers actually tried to replicate it. They figured you'd probably have to boil the bone first to soften the surface a bit, then carve it carefully with stone blades. It took them about an hour and a half.
So not trivial. It suggests real skill, sophisticated expertise, and great ability in bone working, as they put it.
Plus, choosing a bone from a giant deer, which were likely quite rare, might also give it a special character, some kind of symbolic meaning.
Now, this engraving, 51,000 years old, does this predate modern humans arriving in that area? Is this definitely Neanderthal work?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Based on the dates, yes. 51,000 years ago is generally considered before the earliest widely accepted dates for Homo sapiens in Central Europe, which are more like 43,500 to 38,000 years ago. So the thinking is, this points to independent Neanderthal authorship.
But I sense a but coming.
Well, there's always a but in paleoanthropology. More recent genetic evidence has found Homo sapiens individuals in places like the Czech Republic, maybe 400 kilometers away, who had Neanderthal ancestry and lived over 50,000 years ago.
Ah, so there might have been some overlap, some interaction earlier than we thought.
It raises the possibility, yeah. Maybe some early knowledge exchange. But here's the key point the researchers make. Even if there was influence, the capacity to learn, to integrate new ideas, new technologies, abstract concepts into your own culture, that itself is a sign of complex behavior.
Right. Whether they invented it independently or adopted it quickly, it still shows cognitive sophistication.
Exactly. It's a profound element of behavioral complexity either way.
Okay, wow. Let's try and unpack this one last time. After this deep dive, what's the main takeaway?
I think the biggest takeaway is that Neanderthals were anything but primitive brutes. The sources we've looked at paint a picture of sophisticated strategic thinkers.
Yeah.
They organized large-scale operations like that fat factory. They engineered complex materials like the ochre bitumen glue. They developed fiber technology, made string.
Created art, or at least symbolic markings, made jewelry, engraved objects.
Right. All of this points to complex thought, planning, and symbolic capacity.
So that traditional dumb brute stereotype, it's just completely wrong, isn't it? The evidence suggests they were essentially cognitive equals to the early modern humans around at the same time.
That seems to be where the evidence is strongly pointing. They were clearly capable of planning, innovation, abstract thought. They demonstrated a real capacity to organize their way of life.
And the studies themselves are saying this now?
Explicitly, one quote sums it up. Given the ongoing revelations of Neanderthal art and technology, it is difficult to see how we can regard Neanderthals as anything other than the cognitive equals of modern humans.
Cognitive equals, that's huge.
It really is. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, this whole reevaluation of Neanderthals, it's a powerful reminder, isn't it? Our understanding of the past, of human evolution, it's constantly changing. New evidence comes up. It really challenges us to question the assumptions we hold, to look past those easy stereotypes, even the ones that feel, really ingrained.
And think about it, most of us listening, you and I, we carry traces of Neanderthal DNA in our own genomes.
We do.
So this isn't just some abstract story about ancient history. It's part of our shared past. It speaks to the incredible ingenuity that's, well, seemingly always been part of the broader human story.
That's a great way to put it. And maybe a final thought to leave people with. Consider how fast our own world is changing. Our technologies, our understanding.
Yeah, exponentially fast.
So what might a future deep dive, maybe centuries from now, reveal about our intelligence based on the digital artifacts and physical traces we're leaving behind today?
It's a bit unnerving. And maybe for you listening, what other historical facts or long-held beliefs might actually be due for a similar deep dive? Due for a complete rethink based on fresh evidence coming to light. Something for you to mull over until our next deep dive.